Washington, D.C. had seen storms before, scandals, resignations, impeachment hearings, but nothing quite like the political cyclone brewing in the heart of Capitol Hill. The news cycle had been on fire for weeks. Ever since President Donald Trump's re-election to a second term, his administration had moved with the speed and aggression of a locomotive with no brakes. At the center of that locomotive was his newly appointed U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi had always been a fierce figure in politics, blonde, bold, and with a courtroom presence that could freeze the blood of seasoned senators. A former Florida Attorney General and loyal Trump ally, she had returned to Washington with one mission: drain the swamp for real this time. But the swamp wasn't going down without a fight. Enter Jerry Nadler, the Democratic heavyweight from New York, chair of the House Judiciary Committee and one of the longest-standing figures in Congress. Nadler had seen it all. He had been a central figure in the first impeachment inquiry, a staunch opponent of Trump's policies, and now, with a Republican-dominated White House and an emboldened Department of Justice, Nadler found himself under fire. The trigger? A massive DOJ investigation into the alleged misuse of funds during the 2021 COVID relief packages. Pam Bondi, leading the probe, had uncovered a series of email chains, expense reports, and communications implicating several House members. Among the names floating in redacted files leaked to the press, Jerry Nadler's. The headlines were ruthless. Bombshell: DOJ eyes Judiciary Chairman Nadler in COVID funds probe. Pam Bondi's warpath: swamp creatures beware. Nadler, known for his steely calm and verbose rebuttals, called an emergency press conference outside the Capitol steps. These allegations are politically motivated witch hunts designed to distract the American public from the real corruption taking place in the executive branch, he said. Pam Bondi is nothing more than a political assassin dressed in legal robes. But Bondi wasn't about to let that slide. She called for a live hearing, a full-throated, nationally televised showdown. The House Judiciary Committee versus the Department of Justice. The stage was set. The media dubbed it the Swamp Tribunal. Viewership expectations shattered records even before the hearing aired. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, all were preparing for the battle of the decade. Twitter exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Bondi versus Nadler. Hashtag Drain It All. Hashtag Swamp Tribunal. At 9 a.m. sharp on a humid Monday morning, Bondi entered the hearing room wearing a navy suit, calm but confident. Nadler sat perched in his chair at the helm of the committee, gavel in hand, expression unreadable. Ms. Bondi, Nadler began, you're here today under the pretense of legal concern, but the American people see this for what it is, an abuse of power. Bondi didn't flinch. Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, the American people deserve the truth. And unfortunately for you, I brought receipts. Gasps rippled across the room. Pam Bondi leaned forward, voice like ice. You misused funds, Congressman. Not once. Not twice. 17 times. And the evidence is airtight. She opened a manila folder and slowly slid documents across the table, evidence obtained through FOIA requests, whistleblower statements, and subpoenaed bank transfers. Camera flashes lit up the room like paparazzi at a movie premiere. Nadler looked down at the papers, his jaw tightening. This is a mischaracterization. Bondi cut him off. What's a mischaracterization is using taxpayer dollars meant for small business relief to fund luxury office renovations and out-of-state retreats for political donors. We traced every dollar. Silence. Even the Democrats on the committee looked rattled. The swamp was shaking. But this was only the beginning. The room had gone quiet, not out of disinterest, but stunned disbelief. Pam Bondi had just laid out the first pieces of a legal ambush, and Jerry Nadler, for all his years of political experience, looked uncharacteristically shaken. The tension was electric. Every cable news network switched to full coverage. On Twitter, hashtag Pam Bondi and hashtag Nadler Meltdown were both trending within minutes. In homes across America, from rural Texas diners to Upper West Side apartments, viewers leaned in, hungry for the next bombshell. Nadler cleared his throat and regained some composure. These documents, he began, waving a dismissive hand, are circumstantial at best. You're using incomplete information and weaponizing it for political gain. That's not justice, Ms. Bondi. That's McCarthyism. Pam didn't flinch. She gave him a tight smile and turned toward the committee, lifting another file. I anticipated you'd say that, Mr. Chairman, she said coolly. Which is why I brought a witness. There was an audible shift in the room as a tall, lanky man in a navy blue suit stepped forward from the back, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. He looked nervous but resolute. This is Thomas Renner, Bondi announced. former chief budget analyst for the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Pandemic Relief. He came forward last month under whistleblower protections, and he has direct knowledge of the misappropriations in question. All heads turned. Nadler's eyes narrowed. Renner raised his right hand and took the oath. Bondi's questions were surgical. Mr. Renner, can you describe what you witnessed in regard to the committee's allocation of emergency funds in late 2021? Renner swallowed and glanced around nervously. There were irregularities. I was instructed to greenlight reimbursements that didn't have corresponding project approvals or documentation. Some were routed through shell accounts tied to third-party contractors, one of which was later revealed to be owned by a distant relative of Congressman Nadler's chief of staff. The room erupted. Cameras zoomed in on Nadler's clenched fists. Bondi pressed on. Were you ever pressured to remain silent about these transactions? Yes, Renner replied. I was told that bringing it up would derail the party's unity message and hand Trump a win. I was also threatened with reassignment to a field office in Alaska. A collective gasp. Even MSNBC couldn't spin this moment away. Bondi turned back to Nadler, calm and deadly. Still want to call this a witch hunt? Nadler fired back. This witness has no direct connection to me. He's speculating based on office rumors and paperwork he didn't author. Bondi, smiling, reached under the table and lifted a flash drive. She plugged it into the projector. Let's go ahead and play this audio file, shall we? Dated March 18, 2022. Voice authentication verified by 3 forensic labs. A click. A pause. Then Jerry Nadler's unmistakable voice filled the room. Just push the funds through the channel. No paper trail. It'll circle back through the contractor. Nobody's going to audit this before midterms. The room exploded. Spectators gasped, reporters scrambled, and security tensed. Nadler's face drained of color. Fabricated, he shouted, slamming the gavel. This is a fabricated. Bondi stood, her voice slicing through the noise. That was your voice. That was your directive. And Mr. Chairman, under federal law, that's conspiracy to commit fraud, misappropriation of federal funds, and obstruction of justice. Boom. Even some Democrats looked stunned into silence. The Republican members leaned forward with gleeful anticipation like wolves catching the scent of fresh blood. Pam Bondi turned to the committee one last time. This is just the beginning. And if the American people want their government back, then it's time we stop pretending the swamp is a myth. It's real. And it stinks. C-SPAN's ratings hit an all-time high. And Jerry Nadler? His political legacy was now hanging by a single, unraveling thread. If Capitol Hill was a battlefield, then the media was the war zone. In the 48 hours following the Swamp Tribunal hearing, every news outlet had turned into a political circus. Fox News was lauding Pam Bondi as a modern-day Joan of Arc. CNN's tone was cautious but not entirely defensive. MSNBC, meanwhile, was practically in crisis mode. Pam Bondi, despite the storm, was calm. Her press team had choreographed every step of the aftermath. In exclusive interviews, she maintained her position. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about corruption. And I'm not afraid to take down anyone who's using the American taxpayer as a personal piggy bank. But the swamp doesn't go quietly. 2 nights after the hearing, a flurry of leaked documents hit the internet. Anonymous emails accusing Bondi herself of engaging in selective prosecutions, campaign finance violations, and an old Florida land deal that smelled like scandal. The headlines flipped like a coin tossed in the wind. Pam Bondi, corruption crusader or political hitwoman? DOJ's new queen under fire. Is Bondi the real swamp? The House Ethics Committee, pushed by Nadler loyalists, announced it would be launching an investigation into Bondi's conduct. It was the ultimate counterstrike, a power move to stall or discredit her crusade. The next morning, Pam walked into her DOJ office to find 2 subpoenas on her desk and a team of congressional auditors requesting documents from her previous Florida AG tenure. But Bondi wasn't rattled. She turned to her deputy, a no-nonsense prosecutor named Alicia Chavez, and said calmly, "They're trying to drown me in paperwork, but I know what's real, and so does the American public." Across the Potomac, Nadler huddled with his inner circle in a private D.C. townhouse. The mood was tense. His communications director, a wiry strategist named Miles Granger, was pacing the room. "We need to flip this narrative. Now," Miles said. "The voice recording is bad, but if we can discredit her before it gets traction, we might survive this." Nadler, wiping sweat from his brow, whispered. Do we have anything on her? Anything that can tie her to Trump in a way that sticks? Something dirty. Miles smiled. We might. Hours later, a shocking new headline took over the news. Breaking. DOJ whistleblower claims Bondi colluded with Trump's super PAC during COVID probe planning. The claim was weak, based on hearsay from a junior staffer with no direct evidence. But in politics, perception often mattered more than truth. The media pounced. Bondi was forced to cancel a scheduled speech in Phoenix. Protesters began gathering outside the DOJ. Bondi called a press conference. She stepped up to the podium, unshaken, wearing a crisp white suit, symbolic, perhaps, of purity in a town drowning in shadows. This is what the swamp does, she began. You challenge it, it fights back. You expose it, it smears you. But let me make something very clear. I'm not backing down. I don't work for the DC elite. I work for the American people. And I have nothing to hide. She dropped another bombshell. In fact, since they've chosen to investigate me, I've opened an additional file. This time on campaign finance inconsistencies linked directly to Chairman Nadler's 2024 re-election bid. If they want war, I'll give them one with evidence. The crowd erupted. Reporters began shouting questions as Bondi turned and walked away, her heels echoing like gunshots across the marble floor. Meanwhile, inside the White House, Trump watched the whole thing from the Oval Office, sipping a Diet Coke. He turned to his chief of staff and grinned. That's my girl. I told you Pam's the real deal. Nadler won't know what hit him. The swamp was fighting back, but Pam Bondi was just getting started. 3 weeks had passed since the explosive tribunal showdown, and Washington, D.C. was operating in full-on crisis mode. Every corridor of Capitol Hill buzzed with nervous whispers. Staffers were deleting emails. PR teams were running damage control. Even seasoned senators were double-checking their financial records. But while the chaos spread like wildfire, Pam Bondi remained composed, relentless, and methodical. Her office was working 20-hour days, compiling data, cross-referencing financial flows, and preparing the next wave of legal strikes. Behind the scenes, a special DOJ task force, codenamed Operation Liberty Ledger, had been formed. Their sole target, political corruption tied to pandemic relief fraud. Bondi handpicked the team herself. No political affiliations. Just prosecutors, auditors, and investigators who hated corruption more than they feared backlash. And the investigation was paying off. On a stormy Thursday morning, Bondi summoned the national press once again. This time, however, she wasn't alone at the podium. To her left stood Alicia Chavez, her fierce deputy. To her right, the head of the IRS Criminal Investigations Division. Behind them, 2 flat screens lit up with a web of names, dates, and wire transfer records. Bondi's voice was sharp and clear. Over the last month, we've tracked over $52 million in misallocated COVID relief funds tied to a coordinated scheme involving 4 congressional offices. Funds meant for small businesses, hospitals, and frontline workers were instead funneled into shell corporations used for private jets, donor parties, and political favors. She turned and pointed at the board. At the center of this network, Congressman Jerry Nadler's former finance director, Alan Schaefer, and a DC-based nonprofit called Civic Renaissance, now a group allegedly founded to support urban revitalization. In reality, it's a money laundering front. Gasps from the press. Bondi continued, not missing a beat. We have signed affidavits, financial records, and whistleblower testimony confirming that Schaefer acted with the full knowledge of Nadler's campaign. And before you ask, yes, subpoenas have been issued. And yes, arrests are imminent. The reporters erupted into a frenzy, but Bondi raised a hand. One more thing, because I know some in the media will still say this is partisan. Let me be clear, 2 of the 4 congressional offices implicated belong to Republicans. This is not about party. This is about principle. The public was stunned. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Bondi wasn't Trump's attack dog anymore, she was a wrecking ball tearing through the hypocrisy of both parties. Independents applauded her bravery. Even moderate Democrats began to distance themselves from Nadler. Fundraisers were canceled. Endorsements quietly disappeared. Nadler, meanwhile, was drowning. He tried everything: calls to legacy media, emergency meetings with the DNC, a statement on the House floor denouncing Bondi's witch hunt. But the evidence was too overwhelming and the whispers too loud to ignore. One night, cameras caught him leaving the Capitol through a back exit, no aides, no press. Just a man realizing the walls were closing in. Inside DOJ headquarters, Pam Bondi gathered her team for a late-night briefing. Alicia Chavez handed her a folder. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Schaefer just cut a deal. Full immunity in exchange for testimony." Bondi's eyes gleamed. "Did he sign?" Alicia nodded. "Oh yeah. And he brought emails. From Nadler. Dozens." Pam sat back in her chair, staring at the evidence that could end the career of one of the most entrenched swamp creatures in Congress. "This," she said slowly, "is how it ends." The morning of the final hearing felt different in Washington, D.C. The air was heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. The rotunda was silent save for the echoing footsteps of staffers and security teams. At the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi stood before a mirror, buttoning her blazer. She was calm, more focused than ever. Today was the day she'd take Jerry Nadler down. Word had already spread like wildfire. Alan Schaefer, Nadler's former finance director, had flipped. The DOJ had in its possession dozens of emails implicating Nadler not only in COVID fund misappropriation but also in an elaborate cover-up involving falsified audits, hush payments, and third-party shell organizations tied to foreign interests. It was no longer just a corruption case. It was a full-blown political scandal of historic proportions. In front of a packed congressional chamber and an estimated 68 million live viewers, Pam Bondi stepped up to the podium once more, this time with the full weight of her investigation in hand. "Members of Congress," she began, "today we present our final findings in the matter of Representative Gerald Nadler relating to the misuse of federal funds, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The projector screens lit up with internal emails. One in particular seized the room. "Get it done. I don't care how it gets routed as long as it doesn't show up in FEC tracking before the vote. JN." A congressional intern fainted. Reporters froze. Nadler sat stone-faced, his skin pale, his lips pursed. Pam continued. "These are the receipts. The money trails. The influence peddling. The silencing of internal whistleblowers. This is what we mean by the swamp. A system that protects its own while the American people suffer. That system ends today." Then came the piece de resistance. Alan Schaefer took the stand. His voice cracked slightly, but his words cut through the silence. "I acted under the instruction of Jerry Nadler. I coordinated with Civic Renaissance Now and 2 other shell firms to redistribute campaign funds through fraudulent COVID relief channels. I falsified reports. I was instructed to do whatever it took to keep the optics clean until after the midterms. I regret everything." He paused. "And I'm not the only one. This was systematic, bigger than one office. But Nadler was the keystone." The gasps turned to shouts. Even seasoned lawmakers began whispering amongst themselves. 2 representatives walked out in protest. C-SPAN's feed was being rebroadcast on Times Square's digital billboards. Nadler's lawyers requested a recess. Denied. Pam Bondi didn't even blink. "I hereby recommend, under the authority of the Department of Justice and with the findings submitted to the House Ethics Committee, the immediate suspension of Representative Gerald Nadler, pending criminal indictment. The FBI has been briefed. Arrest procedures are in motion." And just like that, it was over. The cameras caught it. Nadler, slumped in his chair, surrounded by federal agents. His hands were not cuffed, yet, but his career was. As the agents escorted him out of the chamber, Pam Bondi's eyes didn't leave him once. Outside, protesters cheered. Supporters wept. And inside the West Wing, President Donald Trump looked into the camera during a live press statement and delivered his most viral quote of the year. "The swamp didn't just shake. It cracked. Big league." "Thank you, Pam." Bondi returned to her office that night, exhausted but victorious. She poured herself a glass of bourbon, sat by the window, and looked out over a city forever changed. She had done the unthinkable, not just calling out the rot, but ripping it out root and stem. And though the swamp would inevitably try to rebuild itself, one thing was clear. Pam Bondi wasn't just Trump's attorney general. She was the storm they never saw coming.